Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Real Training for Free. Nick Cavalancia here, sitting in for Randy Franklin Smith. Glad you've joined us. This is one of those really good webcasts that I'm excited about, simply because the last time we did a webcast on identity, there were so many questions that I think we probably stayed like an extra 20 minutes, maybe even longer, just trying to answer all the questions. So really feel like this is a really good topic. And just based on the sheer number of you folks coming in and registering for this and hopefully joining us today, of course, I feel like this is going to be a really good deep dive analysis of some really good information around the identity attack surface. Today's Real Training for Free is made possible by the good folks at Silverfort. And today I am joined by Yiftach Keshet. He is VP of Product Marketing at Silverfort. Yiftach, thanks for joining me.
Hello there.
Glad you're here. And so what we're going to do first is I'm going to talk a little bit about identity, and then Yiftach is going to jump in and do some real kind of detailed look at some security gaps that exist in the identity space. And so the places where I'm going to start are really just kind of focusing on an overarching look at identity itself as an attack surface, and then we'll dive in a little deeper. A couple bit of housekeeping notes. As always, today's webcast is being recorded. You will be sent a copy of it later on this week. I do have the Q&A box open in front of me. If you have not sat on one of our webcasts in a while, I try to make sure that we are as interactive as is possible. So hello, Lowell, back to you. Lowell already said hello in the Q&A. If you've got a question, a thought, an anecdote, a scenario, or whatever it is you feel like sharing that's relevant to what we're talking about, stick it in the Q&A box. I've got it open. We try to include you in on what we're talking about. I try to incorporate questions contextually throughout the webcast rather than just waiting till the end. Yes, there will be formal Q&A time at the end for any questions we don't get to, or maybe if you asked a question and it sort of came in late and we've moved on topically, we'll still get to it at the end. But the intent is, if we're talking about the color of shoes and you ask a question about a specific color, we'd like to answer the question about color of shoes, but we're talking about the color of shoes. Hope that all makes sense. So please feel free to put your questions, comments, thoughts, whatnot into the Q&A box. We'll be happy to incorporate those into today's presentation. And as I go through my presentation today, Yiftach, if you've got some commentary, I might even throw a question your way, but feel free to interject. I'd love to have any thoughts that you have, but anything I'm covering at this sort of high-level introduction, I'd love for you to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the invitation. I intend to do that a lot.
Had to jump in and just talk like crazy. Excellent. I'll take it. All right. So the three things I'm going to talk about here is why identity is probably one of the most important attack surfaces you have to worry about. I will kind of tie in a little bit of the MITRE ATT&CK Framework and talk about how every threat action inevitably kind of ties back to a weak identity attack surface. And then I'm going to talk about sort of what controls, and I don't mean specific technologies, but just sort of the aspects of identity that we can take advantage of to try and protect the threat surface. And then Yiftach is going to take a look at really where the gaps lie today and show you some really practical examples of that. So my first thing here is just looking at some industry data. Those of you that have sat on my webcast before know that I love to go through some industry data just as a way of painting a picture of what is the rest of the world experiencing outside the walls, the logical walls, that is, of your organization. So the first stat comes to us from Microsoft's Digital Defense Report, and that is here that they see that there's 11,000, you can see it here, password-based attacks per second. It's a lot. You know, we used to think that it's not happening, but this is what they're seeing according to their Digital Defense Report, which just came out. It was the last 3 months, 4 months, I think, came out. It's really, really recent in terms of its data set. So that's the first thing here. And this password-based attacks means we've got a bad guy going after identity. It's ultimately what we're talking about. In identity, we're talking about a credential, probably a privileged credential, or in some part of it, whether they're trying to guess the password, or trying to figure out what the ID is, those kinds of things. Using that same report here, you can see some examples around MFA password fatigue attacks. We actually did an entire webcast on MFA password fatigue a while back. And if you're not familiar with that, that is when the second factor is leveraging an app, for example, and I'm not bashing, just using as an example, like Microsoft's Authenticator app has the ability of, rather than you going to, let's say like the Google Authenticator app, which you'd grab the 6-character passcode that is synced up, and you type it in as your response, the Microsoft Authenticator app instead will simply put a prompt saying like, you know, you're wanting to log in over on this place. Do you agree with that? You press the button and say sure. And the fatigue attack is one where some bad guy tries to log in at like 2 in the morning, and you keep getting woken up theoretically by your authentication app. It says, did you ask for this? And you're like, no. The first time's super easy, but then when you keep getting it every 10 minutes or something, you just want to go to bed, and eventually you fatigue. You break down and go, fine, yes, go away. You figure it's just it's a glitch or something, and instead it's actually someone trying to log in as you, and that's the idea. But you see here, 6,000 MFE fatigue attacks per day. From the same report here, 10,000 credentials are posted on the dark web every month for sale. So we've got these, and these aren't necessarily aligned, like the 10,000 credentials on the right are based on the 11,000 password attacks on the left, but, oh, thank you, Anthony says the Microsoft MFA now prompts you to enter in a code. Okay, good, because that we can see that's probably in response to the fatigue attacks, because it's really a kind of a weak link in the chain there. So these are not corroborated data points. These are just separate data points that all center around the attack on identity.
Sure.
And then go ahead, Yiftach, please.
So I think, I mean, I've just had a glimpse on that report. I think it was a couple of days ago, and I think that in a way, aggregating all these numbers together, I think it's time for us to acknowledge that the scenario of an adversary that has the legitimate username and password of your users, it's no longer a possibility. It's a certainty. It will happen. Okay, maybe it won't happen this week. Maybe it won't happen next month, but it will happen. It's a 100% certainty that it will happen. Now, and in the same way, for example, that when you engineer your endpoint protection, you're saying, okay, yeah, I have a good product. Okay, I have a product that will block the execution of 97% of ransomware payloads, right? But there is a certainty that 3% or 2% will be able to execute, right? That's the realistic assumption that you build your security architecture. So the certainty of your users' credentials being compromised and an adversary using them to impersonate your users and attempt to maliciously access your resources, this now is a certainty, and I think that's one of the most significant shifts in the cyber threat landscape, because it was not the case I don't know 5 years ago or 7 years ago, but this is really, I think, the most important change in the threat landscape that we as security practitioners have to respond to.
And the interesting thing here is, I think the real pivotal point, or the juncture that made the difference to get us to what you're talking about, is the fact that we've got initial access brokers. Because before, go back, you said 5 years ago, I'll just take that as the example. 5 years ago, I think all of us that are listening, all of us can agree, it was someone was trying to break into your company, and they maybe mostly like opportunistically through, let's say, something like a phishing attack, and they gain access to an endpoint, and then they look around, do discovery, figure what accounts there are. It's all very kind of opportunistic. What can I gain access to? Now with initial access brokers, it's I've got the access to Nike, or I'm making up a company or whatever. It doesn't matter which company it is, but some company that's named who wants access to this company. And now instead of it being more like, I'm going to hack into your company, and as part of doing that, I need credentials. Instead, it's, I'm going to get the credentials and then attack your company. And it's just completely turned on its head the mindset of the order in which this all takes place. And identity is right there at the pivotal point. Yiftach?
Yeah, no, this is so true. No, I can think about several attacks that we've analyzed in the past 6 months. And I think, again, I'm more than a decade in the cybersecurity industry. And I've been through endpoint and network and SOC and incident response. And I think there's a common denominator for many attacks that you see. So it starts a traditional way. An adversary gains initial access to an endpoint, and then spreads with lateral movement. But the difference is that what is missing is the period of time in which back then attackers spent on the actual compromise of the credentials, of finding the users, scraping the dumping the memory for hashes. It's like everything today now happens so fast. It's clear that when the attacker has already launched the initial access phase, they already had the credentials in advance, and as you said, probably bought them from another adversary, which its role in the cyber attacks ecosystem is to put up credentials for sale. So yeah, this is something that we are witnessing almost on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I remember reading a report probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. I don't get the report right; it's off the top of my head. I'm not getting it, but the dwell time is now like sub 1 hour on the average. It's meaning the amount of time from the initial access to actually starting to move laterally. It's less than an hour now. Julian's asking about monitoring for companies' exposed credentials on the web. I know, Julian, I don't have one off the top of my head, but I know there's a couple of services at least that exist that do that. They monitor the dark web and they monitor those types of areas to see if like your organization name shows up, if usernames show up, those kinds of things. So that does exist. I just don't have one off the top of my head. And if somebody can think of one in the audience that does that monitoring, put it in the Q&A box and we'll just keep this back and forth going. The last stat that I've got on here is from a Proof Points the Human Factor report 2023. And this has to do with once someone can get to an endpoint. Now, in the conversation that Yiftach and I were just talking about, it's more like, you already have a credential because you bought it from an initial access broker in the dark web, and then you use that to gain access to maybe an endpoint through either some remote access or RDP or something like that. And this is about once you're on an endpoint, you have a foothold here. They're saying you can see it's like about 15% or more. One in 6 have some exploitable identity risk, meaning there's something with privilege. And when you look at the report, they even mention a couple things that are not on the screen here. And I have in my notes here, 10% of endpoints have an unprotected privileged account password, and 26% have exposed accounts being up to and including domain admins. So there's quite a bit here. So for Julian, a couple of responses here. Zero Fox, Michael uses for dark web monitoring. Constella and Kala, Fabio says. Recorded Future, Patrick says. SpyCloud, Intel 471. Cyber 6Gil, Cyber Angel, says Simon. Dark Owl says Anane. So UpGuard as well from Vadim. So a bunch of them. I'll read them again really quick because I went through them kind of fast, Julian. But UpGuard, Zero Fox, Constella, K-La, K-E-La, Recorded Future, SpyCloud, Intel 471, Cyber 6Gil, G-I-L at the end, Cyber 6Gil, Cyber Angel, and Dark Owl. It's a whole bunch of them. Thank you. See, it takes a community, and we are a community. Love that. Awesome. All right, so let's talk about why identity is at the center of an attack. Now, the idea here, of course, is you need privileged access to do most everything, and that's kind of what this comes down to. There is some attack on identity kind of early on when we talk about privilege escalation. It could be that it's a domain account. It's possible. It also could be possible and probable, and on both sides, that it's just simply trying to gain access to a local account or even a local admin, a local privileged account. Versus, when we start going towards the right-hand side of the MITRE ATT&CK Framework, and this is the Windows matrix. By the way, if you've never seen this before, maybe if you're new here and you've never seen the MITRE ATT&CK Framework, go to attack.mitre, spelled MITRE.org. This is a framework of all the bad guy threat actions organized into a number of techniques. Those are across the top, and then tactics, and then very specific procedures. It's very specific methodologies that are used, and it defines everything. It's fantastic. So, but back to this privilege escalation, there is some stuff that happens during the privilege escalation, but typically that is more about gaining privileged access to the endpoint, establishing stealth, establishing persistence, getting that foothold that's not going to be taken away. And that's about it. So there is that. But the majority of the MITRE ATT&CK Framework is actually kind of over on the right-hand side and really starts with credentialed access. And we're talking about here where we're trying to gain access, whether it's by using a multitude of different ways of it could be, you heard Yiftach talk about things like scraping RAM on the endpoint. Maybe you grab a credential there, you try to gain access to Active Directory. There are ways of even forging or stealing tickets. You can do that. You can steal sessions. There is ways of trying to literally to exploit Active Directory itself. Lots of ways of doing it. So it all starts here with credentialed access. And then I think you all know where I'm going with this, and this is not going to be rocket science here at all. But then every other action in the MITRE ATT&CK Framework, almost all of these, if not all of these, I didn't go through every one and look at the sub actions, sub tactics, sub techniques and so on. But I'm just going to say a blanket statement. All of these require the privileged access that are gained through credential access to some degree, one way or the other. So it creates, because with credential access being that pivotal point, and meaning that the threat landscape surrounding identity is going to be the most critical one. So if I go back a page for a second here, yes, we need to do things like block initial access. Like we need to, like you ever see like phishing over in the far left and kind of the middle of the column there. Yes, still need to protect that, of course. But the idea is that we're really trying to prevent the access of identity that has privileged access, and then therefore we prevent everything after that. I mean, Yiftach, you're looking at this from a lens, even though it's from a vendor, but you've been so focused on identity. When I make the statement, kind of you stop the access to identity, you stop everything after it. How close would you say I
am? You're fairly close, I think.
I love that. Okay, tell me how I'm fairly close, because I want to hear this. This is great. I mean, that's okay. It's a perfectly acceptable answer. Tell me.
Oh, okay. So you're fairly close. I mean, you're not 100% close, because there's always the temptation to say, okay, listen, attackers do that. Hence, if we'll block this path, then okay, it's all garden of roses. Unfortunately, it's unfortunately, usually, when you block attackers' path through the door, they search a path through the window. If you block the window, maybe through the ceiling. If you move, they hound after you and hunt you down. It's like I do think that today, and here I totally agree with you. I think that, and actually this is an insight that I've been hearing from a lot of security practitioners. I think think about like this. The first decade of between 2000 and 2010, that was the network security decade, right? The firewalls, the IPSs, the next gen firewalls. Then at the last decade, that was the decade of the endpoint, right? There came that was when EDRs and next gen AVs replaced the traditional signature-based antivirus, right? So attackers have a really hard time to the network attack surface and the endpoint attack surface. They're fairly covered. I think that the reason why identity has really flown to the center is because attackers acknowledge that at least at the moment, this is an attack surface that is significantly less protected than the others. Okay, and it means that in the short term, if you're able to cover this attack surface at the short term, yeah, you're able to, I think, to immediately block the vast majority of attacks that you see out there. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I like the when you started talking about the window or the door, that you can't just assume that we're going to, if we stop on the left, everything on the right doesn't happen. I love that thinking, because that's always the way that our layered security model should be, is you always assume the worst, assume something's going to get past it. That way you build another layer using a different methodology and so on. So love that completely. Let me talk the last part here about some of the kind of the security controls that are going to help the identity surface. And These are some of the, you can even think of these as gaps if you don't have all these. So you have that identity down at the bottom representing the ID that exists that has the privileges given to it and so on. And we start with something like passwords. Password is a control. And we all know at this point, I think we've done enough webinars and hopefully you've seen like some of the images that have gone around, the really good images that show like how long it would take someone to hack modern day a password that looks like X. And X could be like 8 characters, simple, you know, or if it's this long and it's complex and so on. And the general consensus is, you know, complexity and length. Just do those things and it becomes really, really difficult. I tend to tell people, if you like, especially if it's someone that is not technical, you know, use a formal sentence and make sure that you've got like a number in the sentence. So you like say like, I'm the #1 person that does this. And if you think of that sentence, and I use like say the £sign and 1, so for #1, and I said there's an apostrophe in there. There are spaces all along. There's capital letters and lower letters. That's all I have to do. Remember, just memorize a formal sentence that uses a couple specific things in it. You got yourself a really, really secure password. All right, so you have that, but then you also have those additional authentication factors. And that could be biometrics. That could be the apps that we've been talking about. There's a whole NIST standard on that talks about authentication factors that you can use. And so there's those kinds of things that come into play. But then there's also what I'm calling request factors. And this is where we start to get in that realm of like SASE, ZTNA, zero trust kind of technologies that start looking. Oh, John says I read somewhere that the bad guys are cracking up to 18 characters. Man, I need a longer sentence. Okay, or maybe mine is long enough. I don't know. I know my bank password is like 21 characters right now, and it's a lot. It's like the one thing I definitely have memorized. But anyways, back to request factors. When you get into these more complex type of solutions that are specifically watching, I couldn't decide between what I was going to call request factors or behavior factors. And here's what I mean. They start looking at like, well, what's the endpoint that's making this request to log on? What's their MAC address? What's the IP address? Is this a request that normally happens from this specific machine for this specific account? What time of day is it? What day of week is it? It's all those other factors that go around the authentication request to go, is this normal? Is it something we always see? And if not, maybe we ask someone to take a look at this before we give them access. You know, so there's that kind of a control that is necessary there. And then the last one is just the idea around privilege itself. And from that perspective, I'm thinking about, first off, least privilege. And that means, of course, give just the permissions that are necessary for that identity to do its role. You could also start talking about things like just-in-time privileges. You could talk about things like removing standing privilege entirely, which is the opposite of just-in-time. Standing privilege means I give you I give you admin rights to the SQL server that we have in the office here in the data center. Great, you always have those rights. That's standing privilege. Instead, it's more just-in-time. Whether it's actually granted just in time to your account, or maybe you leverage just in time access through something like a PAM solution, whatever it is, but just thinking about these controls to try and protect the identity surface. You know, these are just some of the ways that we can try to lock down, but at the same time, I want you to think about these as potential gaps that exist in this identity surface. For example, going back to the beginning, you don't have complex, you don't have long passwords. You don't have MFA for every single account in your environment. I mean, all of them, not just admins, all of them, right down to the mail clerk. So that way, there's no way for a bad guy to leverage a low-level account to then try and trick someone with a higher-level account to, let's say, install some malware or whatever the case is on their machine. So everybody gets some kind of MFA. The request factors, certainly for privileged accounts or privileged access, certainly for like remote access, those kinds of things. And then how you deal with privileged access in the first place is something that's a little more advanced. So as we're going up this list from the bottom to the top here, we're getting kind of more advanced and more honed in on who's going to be subject to these controls, but this also is sort of defining where those gaps exist. Yiftach, any commentary at all on this sort of layered listing of controls and or gaps as you would look at it?
No, this is fairly, no, this is comprehensive and straight to the point. I think the caveats in this framework, I mean, we all know them. Right? When you talked about complex password, okay, password with I don't know, 18 characters, 21 characters. So today I think that many apps require you, you know, to qualify to these standards. But what happens actually, quite a cool research that I've seen, the more you increase the requirement of passwords complexity, okay, the more you increase the chance that will happen what I call, you know, self-person SSO, right? So I come up with this amazing complex password nobody can guess, okay, which is a combination of my birthday, my mother-in-law first name, and I know the name of the school that I went to when I was a kid. Okay, but what happens is that there's almost no human being that can actually sustain more than one password at that level of complexity. Okay, so you end up using this super complex password you're so proud of for literally every resource you access. Okay, and what happens is that sometime at a certain point you leave it exposed, right? You accept cookies. It resides in your browser, and then basically all of this complexity gets exposed to an attacker. And adversaries know that I think that every password that's more complex than password 123, there's a good chance that this is the password for literally every work-related and personal resource that the individual user accesses.
Yeah, LastPass does a study every year. I haven't seen the one for this year, and they still talk about how much people reuse the same password. And it's still a material percentage. By material, I don't necessarily mean like more than half, but even if it was like 22%, still a lot of people that still don't get it. Don't do that. You know, I'm in complete agreement. And like I myself, I practice what I preach. I literally don't have the same password on any two systems, applications, anything. Nothing at all. For that exact reason, no two are the same ever. And I have an offline password vault that is encrypted because I don't trust online password vaults in case those guys get hacked or something. So I'm being like super secure and as best I can in a way that I think is actually better. I'm using like a 10-year-old vault technology. It's 256-bit encrypted, but it's like offline on one machine, and then there's backups and that kind of thing. But anyways, so let's do this. Yiftach, I'm gonna pass things over to you. Yiftach is going to talk a little bit here about security gaps that exist in most environments, talk about some of the very specific security gaps using some practical examples here, and then show you how to try to detect and manage those weaknesses. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to make you presenter, Yiftach, and then once you've shared out your screen, I will let you know that I can see your screen so that we're certain there, and then you'll be good to go.
Okay, so 1 minute. Let me just fire up my own slides.
Just booting up my computer now, and if you guys just give me about another 2.5 minutes, and I can see your screen there. What's the identity attack surface? As Yiftach is doing his presentation, again, those of you in the audience, if you have questions, I have the Q&A box open here. I'm going to try to interject those questions throughout his presentation, and of course, we'll have time at the very end for some questions as well. So with that, Yiftach, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's start. Okay, no, actually, Nick has already started. Let's follow up and dive a bit deeper. Okay, so again, hello everyone. I'm going to talk about the identity attack surface, which is not yet a common term. So let's try to get our act together and understand what we're talking about. So everything we talk about takes place in the post-compromise stage, right? As an attacker, I've already somehow managed to get a foothold on the environment. It might have been through weaponized emails, through through compromising VPN credentials. We all know that this is relatively not a very challenging task. Okay, so I'm now at the environment. What is my goal now? Now, we all know that the first machine that I've landed on is not necessarily the one that is enough to fulfill the object for which I've launched the attack in the first place, right? If the purpose of the attack is ransomware, so I want to spread across as many machines as I can and plant my ransomware payload. If it's data theft, I need to get to the servers or to the SaaS applications where the data that I'm interested in resides. Okay, so I need to start to move around, right? And the way that I move around in this environment is with compromised identities. Now, the identity attack surface is everything that, as an attacker, assists me in either the preparation of this threat, meaning discovery of users, credential access, and their compromise, elevation of privileges. All of these are preparatory steps, right? It's setting up building up the ability for me to take all of these and do an action and start moving laterally within the environment. In that sense, we can say that what is the identity attack surface? Every resource that you can access with credentials, with username, password, hash, cookie, token, whatever, this is the identity attack surface, right? Now, and I think what we're going to talk about today, what we're going to discuss and discover, is that I would say the attack surface is not it's not a plane. It's rather very rocky terrain with pits and stones and places that attackers can take advantage for their own good. Okay, so let's for the next 3-4 minutes or so, let's adopt the perspective of the attacker. Okay, as an attacker, the ideal user accounts that I want should fulfill 3 conditions. Ideally, all 3 of them. Okay, but even one of them will do. First of all, I want them to. They should be easy to compromise. Okay, easy to compromise. Translating it to actual malicious TTPs, ideally, I would like a clear text password. Okay. Now, as Nick said before, I might have bought it in advance, right? But first of all, still there are attackers that try to do that on the fly. Second, let's assume that I'm the attacker that is penetrating the environment in order to extract these credentials and sell them to other threat actors. Okay. So I'm looking for user accounts that their identity is easy to compromise. Okay, spoiler: we're going to talk about NTL and V1. We're going to talk about service accounts with SPNs. Okay, and different authentication protocols. But that's the first requirement. Okay. Second one is I want user accounts that their compromise will yield high return. Okay. For example, in my company, Silverfort, I happen to know that there are very strict access policies, okay? And for example, I myself, I do not belong to the IT team, so the only computer I'm allowed to access is my own machine and one file server, okay? Suppose I'll be careless enough and an attacker will be able to compromise my credentials. This attacker will probably get a bit disappointed, because with my username, password, hash, whatever, the number of resources that the attacker could access will be fairly low. Okay, so we're looking as an attacker for attackers that yields high return, and if I'll ask you which accounts are these, I assume all of you will say admins, right? Which is true, but I do have a small surprise that is awaiting about 20 minutes from now. But yeah, that's the default choice. And also, as an attacker, I want accounts that are least protected. Okay, least protected means either accounts that I can count of them to be not as visible as other, or not subject to security controls that other accounts are subject to. I remember in my days when we used to do pen testing, or when we or as ethical hackers, many times say, okay, yeah, of course, ideally I want to compromise the credentials of the domain admin. Okay, but there's a very good chance that this domain admin, that the SOC analysts were already instructed, to closely monitor this account's activity. I don't know, every 15 minutes check that nothing irregular happens. So it's not to say that it's impossible, but there are so many accounts that are just lying there out in the shade. As an attacker, I would rather to target these. Okay, so these three pillars. Okay, when we're talking about weaknesses, identity weaknesses, gaps in the identity attack surface, usually it relates to any one or more of these three dimensions. Nick, do you want to relate to that?
Wait, say that again. Sorry, I missed what you were saying. You went
Okay.
out just for a second there. To me, I think that's me though. Ask the question again.
So basically, I'm saying attackers are after accounts that are easy to compromise, yield high return, least protected. Okay, does that align with what you see, with what you encounter? And
100%. And in a lot of cases, this is purely opportunistic. They have a goal in mind, but if you even think the initial access brokers that exist today, they're doing that front end work that every threat actor had to do. Go back in using our example that you and I've been talking about 5 years ago. 5 years ago, they did everything. They had to break in, they had to get this stuff, find the easy to compromise attacks, get those high return. Great, I found someone who's actually a domain admin, or at least they're a local admin. I can get your persistence or whatever it is. And the least protected is those ones where you're going to talk about some of these gaps, because I know some of the things you're going to talk about on here. Those ones where they already know. It's just really interesting because Microsoft used to have this 288-page guide that was telling you how to harden Active Directory. And I used to ask everybody in the room when I would do presentations, the live presentations, how many of you have read this? And like once in a while I get a hand. So do you know who has read this? All the threat actors. Because that's basically the manual of like, here's the stuff that isn't locked down by default. And so this idea of this initial access broker, these are just people that are honing, and they're honing their what's the word I want to use, their I can't think of their abilities that they have, and they're leveraging these bullets you're talking about here, and they're going, what's the easiest ones to compromise? Let's try that. They know that they have their top 10 list of ways of gaining access to something or whatever it is, their top ways, and they just run through this stuff. It's like it is a business. It's a repeatable business, a repeatable process, super easy. We start off with opportunistic phishing. We see what we can get access to, anything that's actually got a real high return. I found a domain admin at this company that's worth $10 million. And then they price it as such. So, 100% agree. And again, there are bad guys now that do nothing but just do those three bullets there at the bottom.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's go on. I have like two slides of preparation. In this session, we'll present identity weaknesses that qualify for these requirements. So there are a lot of them. Since our time is limited, I've chosen the ones that qualify for each of these three requirements. Now, think about what is the ID of identity weakness. Okay, first of all, it's the impact. Okay. It could be a facilitator for additional malicious activities. Okay, for example, if it enables me to discover a user to compromise a password, or it could be enabler of direct malicious activity. Okay, as for example, the actual movement. There's also the exploitability aspect, right? How available as an attacker in the environment is. How available is the information about this identity weakness? Is it easy for me to discover that it exists or not? Okay, and what is the required foothold that I need in the environment, in the infrastructure, to leverage this weakness? Okay, is it enough, for example, to be able to have remote code execution abilities on an endpoint, or do I need some deeper grasp on the domain? And of course, the prevalence. What is the likelihood that this weakness exists in your environment? And as I've said before, the weaknesses that we will present today are all prevalent, exploitable, and have high impact. When we try to frame these, to map them, the identity attack surface based on the MITRE framework. So you see they reside, most of them, exactly as Nick said before, around, we have the vector that has the credential access, privilege escalation, lateral movement. So some of them are here. Some of them are like users with no passwords or unconstrained delegation. By the way, question, okay? So how many of you, okay, Nick, I don't know if we can do like polling in this webinar.
We'll do an informal poll. They can just answer in the Q&A box.
Okay, great. How many of you are aware that you can configure a user in Active Directory? You can create a user that has a password, but it's not required to enter this password to log in. Okay, is that just out of curiosity?
I'm not even raising my hand. I'm going, what? Seriously? Okay, I've got. So I've got a couple I don't knows already. Didn't know that. Simon says he knew. Dexter says new to me. Mike says yes, that's possible. Michael says I was aware. Carson said I'm aware. Derek says no idea. Neil says I have seen that in my environment. I've got a well aware, a yes, I did not know, a really. I love that one, and never heard of that. So we've got a real nice mix of like, yeah, of course, knew that, and I'm a 4-time Microsoft MVP. I've never heard of this, so maybe I just never bothered to do that. So you guys are better than me in some cases. So keep going.
Okay, cool. So actually, to be fairly honest, I think until a year and a half ago, I didn't know that either. But apparently there is, okay? And apparently attackers can have their way to discover that. Okay, so you have NTLM-v1, okay, which is legacy authentication protocol that is quite prevalent, and we'll talk about it. There's unconstrained delegations, admins that are associated with an SPN, shadow admins, service accounts, all around users, which is something that we'll discuss. Basically, all of these are, I would say, similar like how the song goes. Diamonds are girls' best friends. So these are the attacker's diamonds. Okay, all of these are what they sort of guide the attacker once he or she are in the environment. They will go for these. They will target these. Now, I don't think, I'm telling you in advance, we won't be able to cover all of them in this session because I want to go fairly deep on each and every one of them. But we won't leave anyone that we didn't say, at least say a few sentences. Now, what are the root causes of identity weaknesses? Okay. First of all, misconfiguration and user creation and privilege assignment. As you all know, traditionally, tradition says that there are 7 circles in hell, right? I think there's a dedicated circle for the person who conceived the privilege inheritance in Active Directory. Okay, I believe that maybe there is some individuals that at moments of extreme, concentration and lucidness can really understand how it goes. But most people, if you start to configure users and groups in Active Directory, the chances that you will misconfigure something are so high, okay, that are let's say, okay, without superlatives, they're very, very high. So misconfiguration is one. There's just built-in features that attackers abuse. Okay, when we go to service accounts, usually service accounts, when they're highly privileged, and most of the time they're highly privileged, they are associated with a service with a service principal name. Okay, this, as Microsoft says, this is not a bug; it's a feature. But this is a built-in features that attackers can easily abuse. Sometimes you have identity and infrastructure upgrades, but that still maintain legacy infrastructure in place. This is one of the most common things that we see in the environments that we analyze. There is also lack of alerting of weaknesses as they emerge. Okay, we'll see, and I think if you think about the list of weaknesses that we've seen in the previous slide, mapped across the attack progression arrow, there's almost no utility, no product that can actually show you all of these, that can alert you when any of these weakness happens, okay, or just show you an aggregated visibility to all of them. And this lack of central visibility into the overall identity security posture is something that is, again, from my days as a member of a SOC team, this is really, really hard. Because sure, when you can go to Active Directory and try to dig inside, right? And you can go to maybe other utilities and do that. But you know, the rule of thumb is that if it's an effort, you'll probably not get to it. So these are the main root causes that that create the identity weaknesses that we'll see. And I want to sort of take just to explain what will be the structure now. From now on, I will present these type of weaknesses, explain them in detail, and after each one, I will I want to show you. I will show you a demo of our product, of Silverfort, that basically shows you how you can detect them and mitigate their potential risk. So I want to take a break from this from this sequence and just explain to you in 2 minutes about our unified identity protection platform that we've developed. So Silverfort works like this. What you see on top, this is what you have today, right? You have users and service accounts, and they attempt to access services, resources on-prem and in the cloud, and they send access requests. Now, the way it is done is through the identity infrastructure, right? Active Directory on-prem, ADFS, Azure AD, or Entra ID, the way as it's called the Okta thing, etc. Now, the platform that we developed sits at the back end of the identity infrastructure. And every incoming access, let's take Active Directory, for example, because this is the topic of our talk today. Every authentication or access request that is made to Active Directory, instead of deciding by itself whether to allow access or deny it, forwards it to Silverfort. Silverfort analyzes the access request if it's and determines whether to allow access or block. If it's a human identity, it will trigger MFA based on conditional access policies. If it's a service account, we'll map it. But the important thing and what we'll focus on, and for the sake of this session today, because Silverfort sees each and every incoming access request, it basically enables us to get real-time granular visibility on all the users and resources, authentications, features, Active Directory configurations. We see it as it happens, okay? And soon we'll start to see that in action. So the first weakness we'll talk about is shadow admins, okay? Let's make it interactive, okay? Who from the audience, Nick, you're welcome to join as well. What is your definition of a shadow admin?
That's a good question. I would assume in this case it's an admin that either we've forgotten that even exists, or it's one where it's like when you have to assign domain admin rights to a service account, so they have access to all the systems they need access to, something along those lines. That's my guess. Nate says it's anyone with administrative privilege that's unknown or unintended. Simon says misconfigured standard accounts. Vadim says stealthy admin accounts. Greg says, quote, unquote, innocent looking account with granular permissions directly ACL'd. Ooh, that's a good one. You can't just find them in a group or something. Anybody else? I'll wait here for a second and see if we get anything else coming in. Looks like those are your answers so far.
Okay, great. No, actually, this is more or less accurate. Okay, and then again, all of you are up to a surprise very soon. But let's start with the shadow admins that you guys talked about. Okay, so basically, the definition is again regular accounts that are inadvertently assigned admin privilege or power over admin accounts. Okay, I mean, these are two different things, right? It's either a direct admin that can do stuff, or it's an account that maybe can reset an admin password, okay, or modify admin, or add another set of passwords to an admin, okay? The MITRE techniques to which shadow admins relate are privilege escalation, of course, and persistence, right? If I've started my attack and I've compromised a standard user, and I was able to discover shadow admin, okay, it means that now I, as an attacker, I have higher access privileges, and it's easier for me to persist in the environment because I'm in the shadow. Okay, root cause usually is misconfiguration due to misunderstanding of AD permission hierarchy. I think forgot to write hierarchy here, but it seems from the audience that that we understand that. Prevalence is high. How high? You'll soon see. And exploitability is also high. Okay, it's relatively not very. It's relatively easy to realize that the account I don't know, John Doe at domain.com is a shadow admin. Now, in more detail, we have two options, right? The shadow admin is either a direct member of the domain administrators group in an Active Directory or any equivalent group of admins. Okay, it can happen sometimes. Okay, what is actually more prevalent is a non-member, is a user that is not a member of this group, but is what assigned permissions that provided control on admin users. Okay, examples could be like replicating the directory changes, reset user passwords, read write properties, change permission access. Okay, so and if we want to understand it in more detail, so we have two examples, right? We have the user Jane that can, for example, reset the password or add password to admin Bob. Okay, if as an attacker I've compromised the user Jane, in fact, it enables me to gain control over admin Bob and access all the machines that admin Bob is allowed to access. Now, sometimes, and we're actually about, I think around, it will be around Q1, we're about to release a very, very interesting research about all the types of shadow admins that we discover in the hundreds of environments that we protect. Sometimes, you know, it's like a double. It's user Joe can reset the password of user Jane that can reset the password of admin Bob, okay? And again, remember the 7 circles of hell. There's an 8th circle for the people who designed the permissions model in Active Directory, okay? This is this is the explicit shadow admins that exist, okay? Now let's talk about prevalence. We're continuously analyzing data from hundreds of environments, ranging in their size from small environments of 200 users to environments with 100,000 users and more. Usually, okay, and again, the research will be much more granular. It could range, like the range of shadow admins, the shares portion of shadow admins from the entire standard user accounts range from 3% to 37%. Okay, it's like most likely that you have shadow admins in your environment. Now, what's the problem in terms of exposure? So in September we've released a report. We've commissioned Austrian research to survey. It was more than around almost 700 organizations worldwide, and ask them about the security control, the identity security controls they have in place, like MFA, PAM, etc. And it's relating to what Nick said before. Okay, 34% of organizations says, yeah, we have MFA for almost everyone in the workforce. 64% are only for admins or users that have access to sensitive data. Okay, and this means that within these organizations that don't enforce MFA on their admin users, these shadow admins are basically, once as an attacker I compromise them, there's nothing that stands between me and all the resources that these shadow admins enable me to access. Okay, Nick, do these numbers surprise you? By the way, distribution between almost everyone and only specific users that are subject to MFA?
Actually, not at all. Only because of the fact that if you look at where MFA gets put, predominantly, So again, you're talking about the shadow admins from standard users, so 3 to 37%. But over on the right here, you're thinking about the exposure. From that perspective here, it's the shadow admin is not going to be one that's going to have MFA, because again, it's back to the idea of we don't even know it exists in the first place, and the focus is always on those accounts we're using. I mean, this is sort of the nature of the beast. You think of all of us, we've been doing this long enough. I've been in IT for 30 years. And like you, we know that, yes, we want to have standard procedures, and we want to make sure that we do our periodic, if not, absolutely standardized sets of reviews and that kind of thing. There's an account. I mean, entropy is like the name of the game. There's always an account that's going to fall behind, we forgot about, or one that somebody had assigned permissions that one time, and we promised ourselves, super swear with tied something around your pinky or whatever. I swear I'm going to remove the permissions when I'm done, or whatever. It's the nature of the beast. We're going to end up, and so therefore we're always in this moving forward mentality. And so when there's this new layer of, okay, now we're going to put MFA in place, we're not rolling the clock back 12 years and going, okay, let's start with 12 years ago. What account should I start with? It's just like today and moving forward, so to speak. And it's the nature of the beast. And so I just feel like this isn't a surprise, just because of the fact that something like MFA would be really helpful for them, but they're not going to get put on there. And yet I'm trying to look at the stat you've got here, where you talk about only specific users in the workforce with access sensitive data. Those have the highest exposure. Is that what you're trying to say with that graph there, or are you saying that that's the largest group?
The largest group is the one that doesn't, in 64% of organizations worldwide, only specific users are subject to MFA. Okay, and basically, and I think the way I see it, I mean, this is a huge exposure in the attack surface.
100%. I've been saying since I'm going to say officially 2019. It's on video somewhere. It was at RSA. So I have it. Heck, I can at least say I have been saying this, but MFA for everybody, just hands down. I told you even earlier today, I said including the mailroom clerk. You heard me say that. And that's always the example I use. I always think of some big organization, let's say Manhattan in New York City, and there's this older gentleman who's probably in his 70s, or shouldn't be working, but he's the mailroom clerk, and he works in the sub basement, in some massive building on 6th Avenue. And if you've never been in New York City, you have to just go with me on this. And that person only accesses a web browser, because all they're ever doing is going to UPS.com or USPS.com or FedEx.com and their email. And they use let's say Office 365, and they get access to their email in case someone says, hey, did I get my package or whatever. And you think they don't need MFA. They absolutely need MFA, because if they get you already know where I'm going. You're laughing. I hear you. If they get attacked and someone gets access to their machine and goes, oh, cool, I got the mailroom clerk, what are they going to do? They're going to figure out how to send an email to everybody in the organization that infects all of their systems. And that's the perfect person. That's the ultimate person you definitely want to have MFA on. But the idea is everybody, just everybody. I don't care if it's inconvenient. It's not that inconvenient. They'll get used to it. They'll move on with life. They'll stop bitching about it later, eventually, right? It's everyone has to have this. So I definitely been saying it since. I'm going to find that video now to see what I've been saying it since. I'm pretty sure it might be 2018. I don't know. I'm going to figure that out.
Okay, cool. So let's skip to the demo now. Okay, what you see now, this is our management console. Okay, basically shows all the authentication that emerged from these users, privileged, standard service accounts, through all of these directories, targeting the resources. And these are actual authentications taking place, and Silverfort analyzing them. Now, what I want to show you is what we call the insights screen. And the insights screen basically shows you all types of inventory and glitches in security risks. So for example, one of the things we're able to show you are shadow admins. Okay, you see we have here 3 shadow admins in the environment. Okay, if you want to see who they are, you can just click that. Okay, and you see these are these one. I definitely think we should have more descriptive names in our demo environment. Okay, you can here and and they can click here, check for their, to see more granular data on their activity. They don't have this guy doesn't have anything because probably was disabled some time ago, but let's see if we can load some interesting data. You can see here all the activities that these shadow admins are doing. You can see the policies that they might have, sources, destinations, risk indicators. So this, for once, like think of it, you have, with this, you have the ability, I don't know, every day, like once every 12 hours, say, okay, let's check what's happening. I have here 3 shadow admins. Okay, let's see who they are. Now, on top of the visibility, you can also do something which is much more interesting. You can go here to our policy screen. Now, the way a Silverfort policy works is, okay, you choose the authentication type. In this case, it will be Active Directory. You choose the protocols, Kerberos and NTLM. Now I will configure a policy that is risk-based, okay? And this policy will be triggered by a specific risk indicator. Now, anyone can guess what is the risk indicator that I'm gonna choose. It's not a very hard guess. I will choose shadow admin, okay? And I will say whenever a user that Silverfort has identified as a shadow admin will try to log in, okay, will try to access, 2 options. I can either challenge with MFA or I can also deny access altogether. Okay, so not only am I able to detect these these shadow admins account, I can actually mitigate their risk altogether, because even if they get compromised by attackers, okay, they suppose I choose to configure the policy to deny, I say these shadow admins cannot be used anymore for malicious access. Okay, now going back to the slides, I want to tell you that there's actually another type of shadow admins. Okay, and this type is I don't even know how to call it, and we call it all-around users. Okay, now what are all-around users? These are users that regular accounts that can access exceedingly high number of machines within the environment. Okay, usually we set this threshold to, I think, 15%. Okay, so basically what I'm saying is, you see these numbers. Okay, these are high numbers. It means that as an attacker, if I'm now sitting on a machine in an environment, actually, instead of trying to find the admin or the shadow admin, I can just try my luck with standard user. Okay, like simply, if it's a large environment, 1 out of every 5 users will probably enable me to access the machines that I want. Okay, and this is and now all around users, that's a temporary name that we assigned this, but this is a really major weakness. Okay, because it's not even it's not officially or non-officially, it's not even an admin. Okay, but still, apparently, the common practice within environments is to have a large share of users that, as standard users, can access multiple machines much more than they should. Does that, just out of curiosity, does that come as a surprise to anyone, to you, Nick, or to anyone in the audience?
No, not to me. That kind of makes sense to me. Anyone in the audience? Thoughts? Vadim says no. Andrew says no. We're gonna get lots of no's, I think.
Okay, that's great.
That says makes sense. Anthony says no, not surprised. Jeremy says not surprised. No surprise, no surprise. No, yes, no. So yes, you're good. Yeah. I think everyone's in the same boat that you are.
Yeah. Okay. So that I think, by the way, I think that's the most one of the best examples to cognitive dissonance. Why? Because nobody is surprised when they see that, and yet almost nobody translates it to say, okay, if that's the case, I should probably protect my standard users exactly as I protect my privileged ones, because many of the regular are, in fact, are equal to the privileged ones. Okay, and this is a conclusion that almost nobody makes. Okay, so that was our part about shadow admins, and I want to skip to the next one, NTLM v1 authentication. Okay, now as you all know, in a Windows environment you have Kerberos, that should be the default. You have NTLM, which is NTLM v2, that's the fallback, much less secure. There's also NTLM v1. NTLM v1 is the predecessor of NTLM v2. Okay, as much as NTLM v2 is an insecure protocol in terms of it's being prone to breaches, NTLM v1 is even worse. Okay, the relevant MITRE technique is credential access. Using NTLM v1 practically hands down attackers your credentials on a silver tray. The root cause usually will be that either you have in your environment legacy apps that because they're vital to organization's operation, you won't upgrade them, or it's a remnants of older infrastructure that are unknown to the IT team. I'll tell you, okay, and we'll see that in the product in a minute. I think over 60% of the environments in which we discover NTLM v1, okay, the input that we got from the IT team, from the identity team that managed them, we asked them, do you have NTLM v1 in your environment? Said no, we've upgraded and we've deleted that. So that's the root cause of NTLM v1 authentication, legacy apps or remnants of older infrastructure. It's prevalent in specific verticals, you know, manufacturing, telco, finance. Every vertical that that has some legacy apps that run them usually has NTLM v1 inside, and it's highly exploitable. Okay, let's understand how. So this is the security guidance for NTLM v1 that Microsoft issued, and it's, again, everyone knows that NTLM v1 is a security risk. Okay, no one argues, and still we find, and still we can find it in multiple places. Again, now how prevalent it is, and again, I give you a glimpse from our research. Okay, before that, it is still in use because, again, legacy apps, the old devices, you can't simply, theoretically, you can disable NTLM v1 in your domain controller, but most people will be reluctant to do that because they'll be afraid that it might crash some critical process that still relies on it. Okay, so NTLM v1 is prevalent. Good chance that you have it in your environment. Okay, now it is highly exploitable. If I'm an attacker, I can easily discover that a certain host supports NTLM v1 authentication. I can discover it through the host. I can discover it through the DC. And what I'll do with the NTLM v1 is either downgrade authentication, meaning I will coerce authentication from a system. This is the computer I'm in as an attacker. Now I'll intercept the authentication, I'll initiate authentication to the server. I will crack the incoming hash, and then I can use the hash for silver ticket or DC sync. And again, I can use it myself or sell it as an access broker to someone else. Or what I can do is act as a man in the middle and do NTLM relay. In that case, I'll position myself between a client and a server, intercept the communication, and impersonate the client and access everything that the client is able to access on the server. Okay, these are the typical NTLM v1 attack scenarios, and again, it puts your environment in high risk. And again, let me show you what you can do with what you can do here with Silverfort. So we'll go to our threat detection screen, and in the screen, as soon as the network here will show us, okay, here we can you can see everything. We have 3 NTLM v1 authentication in the environment, meaning you don't have to start digging, you don't have to do anything manually. Okay, you can see all the all the risky NTLM v1 authentication that you have. You can click, and then you see all the machines that actually take place that allow this authentication. Okay, you can export to CC. And if you want to mitigate this risk altogether, you go back to the policy screen, and this is one of our best practice policies that we recommend customers to configure. You create a policy again for Active Directory. It will be only for NTLM for NTLM, and you configure it. You choose the NTLM v1 risk factor, okay? And most chances, again, if you want to eliminate NTLM v1 firmware environment, you just click a deny, and in that manner, you able to mitigate this type of attack altogether. So, service accounts security issue because of these three reasons. They have access privileges, low visibility, and they're excluded from MFA and PAM protection. Okay. The operational flow, you create the service accounts, then you create a script for the service account to do the required task, then you place the script in a machine, and then you configure scheduled tasks that will run automatically. Now, what happens is that there are very common malpractices. Okay, usually it's about undocumented creation. So there's no standardized creation process and no procedure for the end of life of service accounts. Hybrid usage, meaning sometimes admins use their personal accounts as for machine-to-machine access. That Ostrom research has done 3 months ago. Apparently, only 5.7% of organizations have full visibility into their service accounts. Okay, and this is something because usually companies have tons of service accounts. We actually just finished an installation in a very large bank. I think the numbers were around 70,000 or 80,000 service accounts. So if you don't have full visibility into all of them, this is a major blind spot. And I'll show you in our product in Silverfort, again, because we are able to see every incoming authentication, we're able to detect the accounts that feature the predictable and repetitive behavior of service accounts. So we automate their detection. You can see in this screen, you can see all the service accounts that you have within the environment. Okay, we even have one that is called Nick. I don't think it's you, Nick, but anyway, since
I'll take it.
Okay, since we have a Nick here, so let's learn about this Nick fellow. Okay, so what has he been up to in the last 30 days? Okay, not too much, but we can see the risk indicators, we can see the policies, we can see the apps, we can see the roles, we can see everything that is related to the service account. And what we can also do for you, Nick, okay, Silverfort automatically creates a policy that maps the standard behavior of Nick, the sources and destinations, and tells me whenever there's a deviation, choose what to do. We can choose to block access, just alert the scene, or merely alert. Again, and all this is done in a fully automated manner without any single manual effort. All you have to do is just sit back and activate the policy. Now, we're nearing the end, and I want to show you how this type of policies will enable us. These are screenshots from an actual customer, blurred. Now, this customer had a policy for a service account that was configured to alert, okay, not to block. Now, on some rainy day, this customer noticed in the log screen that this service account, SVC1, okay, featured an authentication with a high risk. Why is it a high risk? Because it deviates from its standard behavior. And this should never happen with service accounts. Well, it was allowed, right? Because the policy, remember, the policy was to alert the scene, but we were notified. So what the customer has done immediately, opened the log and definitely saw that this service account, this SVC1, is a privileged account, and an interactive login was performed. Interactive login is when you open a command line and manually insert the credentials. Now, this is something that should never happen with a service account, right? Because all the activity of the service account should take place in the background. Immediately, what the customer has done, the customer did was to update the policy, change it into block access. Okay. As a result, all the further access attempts by the service account were denied, and the incident was fully contained. So, to wrap up, okay. So we talked about the identity attack surface, okay, and we encountered some technical difficulties, audio attack surface, if you will. We've touched service accounts, shadow admins, and TLMV1. There's much more. And I think the moral here is that the identity attack surface is overwhelmingly underprotected, okay? And whether it's because of misconfiguration, native features, you name it, there are a lot of traits in the identity attack surface that enable attackers to easily find accounts that yield high return, that are easy to compromise. We talked about the NTLMV1. What makes the NTLMV1 so dangerous is that you can actually decrypt the hash that it uses and reproduce the plain text password, and then use it everywhere else in the environment. Okay. I want to also let you know that you can also the report that I've quoted from with the statistics is accessible in our website, in this link, and in Osterman's website as well. Nick, I know we're out of time, but if we can, I don't know, manage some questions, I'd be grateful.
Yeah. We definitely have a couple, and your audio is awesome now. It's like even someone said your audio sounds fantastic. So, and Mike, thank you for the attaboy. Some attention to a bunch of your sessions. Having issues on this one, don't be embarrassed. Y'all do a great job, and we appreciate that. This is an odd one. So this is your first webinar with us. This is definitely not the norm. We usually have no audio issues whatsoever. And the fact that we both are having them, I've got to think it's something with GoToWebinar, but I'm going to blame them and throw them under the bus. Real quick, Robert says, does a single Silverfort instance support multiple Azure AD instances, i.e. aggregating multiple IDPs?
Okay, so the short answer is yes. The long answer is that we have a sizing tool. When we come to an environment, we assess the load, the number of users you have in each AD, and then we map it up. But generally speaking, yeah, we can. It's like one node, we call it node one Silverfort instance, can support multiple domain controllers.
And then I have a couple of questions that were probably better asked contextually, but we were having the audio issues and I really don't think I could get to them. This is when you're talking about the managed service accounts. John said, and you have to sort of replay back in your head some of the things you said. John said, should service accounts be changed to quote managed service accounts?
This is always this is the best practice in a way. It's definitely a better alternative.
And then I remember this question coming in while you were actually showing part of your solution right at the very beginning, is around almost 1 o'clock, so about 30 minutes ago. Apologize, but Anain is asking, and the part I don't know is the word this, what this is referring to. But it says, is this similar? So see if you can try to extrapolate this out. Remember what you talked about here. Is this similar to granting a user object domain admin privilege, removing that privilege, and then realizing the user object still has the value of 1 for admin count attribute?
I assume it was asked in the context of shadow admins, okay?
Probably, I think it's something right, yes.
Okay, and shadow admins probably was in the slide that showed the examples of permissions that the user can be assigned with that effectively makes it an admin. And the answer, yeah, and the answer is yes.
Okay, well, now at least we got some context. Now everyone knows why you're saying yes, and that's a better answer than yes. So I think that's definitely all the time we have. Everybody, thanks so much for sticking with us. This was obviously a bit of a trial by fire here, trying to get audio to work really well on both ends. Not the norm. but appreciate you all just being patient and helping us with some of the response back and forth. That does help, especially trying to make sure what your experience is like. We really do care about that. Yiftach, thank you for a really wonderful presentation, some detailed, interactive guidance, and kind of just diving into this issue of some of the security gaps that exist. Remember that today's Real Training for Free, it was made possible by the good folks at Silverfort. We do want to thank them again. So all of you, thanks for sticking with us to the bitter end here. This is going to conclude today's webcast. Thanks a lot for attending, and we'll catch you all.